All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I hereby open the work session of the Planning Commission. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner McGinley,
Present.
Commissioner Landon,
Present.
Commissioner Gill,
Present.
Commissioner Bergen,
Here.
Commissioner Buck,
Present.
Commissioner Salzar,
Present.
and Commissioner Koivula. Yeah.
Here.
Thanks. Everyone's in attendance.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
As we begin our meeting tonight, I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us by phone or online to please keep yourselves on mute during this portion of the meeting. This meeting is a work session where the public may attend but not provide testimony. Later during the regular session at 7 p.m., there will be a time for public comments to the Planning Commission. And our work session item was the Development Code Update Project. And I'll hand it over to Christina to give more information about conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Chair. As a reminder, a conflict of interest is any decision that could or would impact a commissioner's financial interest, the financial interest of their business, or financial interest of their family member or their family member's business. For the Code Update Project, commissioners can only have a potential conflict of interest. The Commission's future recommendation to the City Council isn't binding on the Council, so it cannot result in an actual conflict of interest. Commissioners with potential conflicts of interest must disclose the nature of the conflict and then can participate in the work session. One example of a potential conflict of interest related to the Code Update Project is owning residential or commercial land in Springfield because property values may be affected by the proposed code changes. It's now appropriate to disclose potential conflicts of interest before conducting your work session item.
Thank you, Christina. I'll start us off. I do not own property. I have no potential conflicts of interest. Vice Chair Landon.
Potential conflict of interest because I do own property in Springfield.
Thank you. Commissioner Koivula.
Exactly the same as Commissioner Landon.
Commissioner Gill.
I have a potential conflict of interest because I own property in Springfield.
Commissioner Bergen.
Potential conflict of interest, being a property owner in Springfield and a practicing real estate agent in Springfield as well.
Commissioner Salazar.
Two potential conflicts of interest. One is that I own residential real property in Springfield, and the other is that I work for a real estate developer that develops in Springfield.
And Commissioner Buck.
Two potential conflicts of interest. One, I own property in Springfield, and two, I write residential and commercial insurance in property insurance in Springfield.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mark.
Thank you, Chair McGinley, and good evening, commissioners. Before you again tonight with a work session on the Development Code Update Project. And this is continuing the series of items we've been discussing. And this meeting's agenda or work session packet, I'll say, is a continuation from the last meeting. And I'm sharing my screen here that should pop up in just a second. The continuation from last meeting's packet in that I didn't issue a brand new packet for this meeting. And so we made it through attachments, the first two attachments from last meeting's packet. And so we're going to be starting off with the third attachment tonight. It's this section of code, section 4.2.100. It's the infrastructure standards on transportation. And I briefly went into this at the end of the last meeting. And one of the things I mentioned is a couple of these sections on development standards in general that we'll be going over tonight. I've previously discussed how the majority of the sections of code are not written in like a track changes or legislative format from our existing code, because they're all brand new language for the most part, or completely rewritten sections of code. However, there are exceptions, and a couple of the sections tonight are included in those exceptions. So for the most part, this section is all existing language, although it has been reformatted completely from the existing code section to match the new format of the draft code. And then it is shown in track changes from the existing text. So the majority of all this is all existing text from our current development code that's in effect today, with the exception of what you see in red and crossed out and so forth, and track changes indicating proposed changes. The reason for that with this section in particular is primarily that this section is relatively new, and that some of the commissioners may recall within the last couple of years, we went through some code update process, a more focused code update process for what we referred to as our TSP implementation project, TSP, the Transportation System Plan. Implementing a lot of the new policy language from the Transportation System Plan document and putting it into code. So the Planning Commission and then ultimately the City Council held public hearings on and finally approved a bunch of fairly recent changes, as I mentioned, like within the last 2 years. And this whole section was rewritten as part of that process. So majority of this language is all fairly new and updated and consistent with the new Transportation System Plan, or relatively new Transportation System Plan policy language. So what we have done is just gone in and done pretty minor, I guess, changes to make this section consistent with other changes we're making throughout the code. So you'll see one of my pet peeve words is shall. A lot of times the word shall is used grammatically incorrect. And so moving away from using the word shall at all throughout the code. But beyond that, there are some other minor changes. A lot of it is kind of just not really significant changes. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the changes. And I think we can go through this section pretty quick, but again, I'm happy to get into any of it in detail. You'll see some like this change here where we cross out the word exception. Through at the beginning of the code update project, we did a code audit. We were actually awarded a grant through the State Department of Land Conservation and Development to provide consultant services to help us do that initial audit. Some of the audit included looking at ways in alignment with the City Council direction to simplify our code and make it easier to use and easier to understand. So some of that direction and recommendation through the audit was the structure throughout the code has been and is today existing code is pretty heavy on this exception structure. So we've kind of moved away from these exceptions and just tried to build it into the language. A lot of that also has to do with, we've talked a bit about in the past, of having a clear and objective approval path for housing. So state law requires us to be able to approve housing through clear and objective standards. So we'll see in different areas, including in some of these sections tonight, where there might be different options. There'll be like a clear and objective path for approval, and then an alternative option that somebody could opt into if they chose, or if they can't meet the clear and objective path, to have a discretionary path. And the difference with those two paths is in process. So the process is significantly different under state law. Something that is clear and objective is not considered a land use decision under state law. A land use decision is basically, or very simply, anytime we use discretion in approving something. So again, state law requires us to have a clear and objective approval path for approving housing projects where we don't use discretion that would allow it to be processed as a type 1 process that we previously talked about in the procedure section of the draft code, where there's not necessarily notice to all the surrounding property owners like there typically would be with a land use decision, and not an opportunity for an appeal because everything is clear and objective. It's basically yes or no answers or yes or no questions. And so if all the answers are yes, they meet the standards clearly, then it's approved. And then, but if it is discretionary, there's some judgment used or discretion used, and then there's notice and appeal. So again, kind of hearkening back to the process discussion we had previously in a couple of meetings ago. Other terminology that we're moving away from is using the word family in general. A lot of terms we use like single family development or multifamily development. We're moving away from using the word family. We've changed it to multi-unit housing. Here we say multi-unit development. It's not specific to housing. So we again, trying to make it more clear. Adding the term housing here specifies that it is residential. There is a potential to have multi-unit commercial development, for instance, like some of these mini warehouse type developments you see that where there's multiple units in a development, but these standards are specific to multi-unit housing development. So again, just clarifying terminology changes around using the word land use districts versus zoning districts. Zoning and land use districts can basically be used interchangeably, but just trying to be consistent throughout the code. The numbering scheme itself throughout the code, it's part of the formatting changes we've talked about, is changing. So, but also where things are located in the code are sometimes changing. So here we've moved some of the provisions out of what is the residential section, this old section 3.2, into the special development standard section. So just changing citations. Again, the changes throughout this section are pretty minor, kind of cleanup type things. So I'm going to just scroll through here and see if anything else jumps out. There are some areas that still need a little bit of work in even this section. And I think it's just in terms of trying to provide more clarity. And so a lot of times there's code that talks about approving things or how standards are approved, but it doesn't necessarily specify the process for how to do it. So here we're specifying that this this requirement, it talks about extra right-of-way width for medians may be required. Well, and the question was, well, when would that be required or how would that be required? And because this is a may, like this may be required, that's using discretion. We have to determine when we might require extra right-of-way. So that would be a discretionary process. So just saying that it's a land use decision process points to the process of a type 2 decision where discretion is used to evaluate that. It's not that we would always require extra right-of-way. So there's a lot of that kind of trying to be a little more specific or point to the appropriate processes. This is, again, some of that alternative language. We've tried to spell out the difference between where there are clear and objective approval standards versus alternative standards. I'm gonna just keep scrolling here. I think this section's, it's kind of a long section, but again, there's not a ton of significant changes. Again, all these types of diagrams and standards for street widths, and these were all updated and are fairly new. We're not proposing to change any of that. And I'm happy to entertain questions at any point. The one thing, so we've talked a lot in the past about housing and middle housing. And so we are incorporating all the new state requirements for middle housing into the code update. That has necessitated some changes. So here is a example of where middle housing does change some of our standards. And so middle housing includes 5 different housing types: duplex, triplex, fourplex, cottage clusters, and townhomes. Under our existing code today, everything above duplex is defined as and included within multifamily residential. So with the new middle housing changes, we're breaking out triplex, fourplex, townhomes, and cottage clusters out of the multifamily and considering it middle housing. And then multifamily, we're changing the name to multiple unit housing, will then be basically everything 5 units and above, except there's kind of cottage cluster falls. Cottage clusters can actually be more than 5 units. And so basically anything that's middle housing is not multiple unit housing. So anyway, because the new state rules for implementing House Bill 2001, the legislation on middle housing, is very prescriptive. The rules very clearly talk about what we can and cannot require with development of middle housing. It does talk about, like in this case, the driveway design specifications. We're pulling out middle housing right here and referring to a different section for these driveway design standards, because the state laws dictate that we basically can't treat middle housing in certain ways for even driveway design. So it was easier to refer to a different section here for middle housing than try and incorporate the middle housing standards here. It makes it a little more cumbersome to flip back and forth between code sections. The other thing I'll say is, even though here duplexes remains as part of this category, the middle housing rules treat duplexes slightly different than the other middle housing types in a lot of respects. And for the most part, basically duplexes are going to have to be allowed essentially the same as a single family home would be allowed. So we basically have to treat them exactly the same. A duplex is allowed anywhere a single family home will be allowed. I do see a couple hands pop up. I'm not sure who raised their hand first. I'll defer to Chair McGinley.
Thank you, Mark. I have myself followed by Commissioner Cuevila. So this was actually where I was going to make a comment before. I know one of the goals of the Development Code Update project is to make the development code easier for folks to understand. And I just think there's something confusing about listing middle housing and multiple unit housing. I don't want folks to have the glossary out to understand this table.
Right.
And so my suggestion is to call out the middle housing types. So have, single unit dwellings and duplexes, followed by triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, and townhomes that then refer to SDC 4.7. And then under that, multiple unit housing, and maybe something in parentheses like, housing that has more than, certain amount of dwellings, or, housing that isn't listed above, just because I don't necessarily know that the average community member will understand the difference between middle housing and multiple unit housing. And even now it's hard to reconcile as a commissioner that difference. I feel like it can get a little bit twisted. So that's just my comment. And then I can go over to Commissioner Puebla. And then just a reminder to not use the chat. So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark. Looking back at code section 4.2.105D.
Sorry, Commissioner Quavela, could you just repeat that again? 4.2.
Yeah, I've got to lean closer to my microphone.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's fine.
4.2.105D.
105D, thank you.
Which is the street network standards, general criteria section. I don't think that very many of us on who are currently on the commission were involved with the joint hearings we had to set up the transportation systems plan with the county board planning commission as well. I think maybe, I know Commissioner Landon was, but I'm not sure if any of the others were, but that was a rather long involved process to get the transportation system plan through. And there were a number of nuances regarding particularly the local street network and also multi-use paths that were adjusted through our hearings, that I believe that some of the sections could potentially be in conflict with some of those decisions that were made during that transportation systems plan, among which would be local street network must not create excessive travel lengths. Streets must be interconnected for the efficient provision of public and private utilities. Alignment of local streets must enhance the efficiency of the regional collector and arterial streets by balancing traffic, and that the local street network must provide logical and efficient extensions of the public street system to adjoining properties. As I said, in the discussions under the transportation system plan development, a lot of those things were changed slightly to say that that each local street connection should be looked at independently and should not be held to some of these standards that I believe we're talking about in this section of the code. So I'm not sure if maybe we should, you could get together with, I forget who the main planner on that TSP was.
Emma Newman.
Yeah, Emma Newman. So she probably remembers some of the discussions that took place regarding interconnectivity. Some people were expressing that they lived on dead ends. They liked living on dead ends. They didn't want streets connected. And we really got to a point that we were trying to accommodate some of the neighborhood's desires regarding the transportation system plan. And I don't believe that's really being captured in 4.2.105D. So if that could be checked out, I'd sure appreciate it.
So I can say now that Mark's not proposing to change this language. This is the current language that was approved in that 2019 project. And after the Planning Commission made its recommendation, there was a process with the City Council as well. And I believe the City Council changed slightly the approach they wanted to take after the Planning Commission provided its input. So this is consistent with what the City Council adopted in 2019 for the parts that you cited. Mark hasn't changed any of that language, but I will say that this language does provide flexibility for the situations that you're talking about. In 2019, there was a proposed map that provided very little flexibility.
Exactly.
And this language was actually the language that was intended to be more flexible than that map. So input on this language is helpful, but it is consistent with the direction that the City Council gave, taking into account the Planning Commission's feedback in 2019, because this is the language they adopted.
Well, I'm afraid I disagree on that. I think that what we're talking about here, this appears much more restrictive. This appears much more restrictive than what was decided in the transportation system plan discussions with us and the county in the county
It
planning commission.
may be
So
different than what the planning commission discussed, but this is what the city council adopted based upon the discussion that the planning commission and that's all I'm saying is that
And-
this is an
Yeah.
issue on the 20.
I'll
Thank
just
you.
chime in really quick that there was a very robust, and I was involved, there was a project team of us for that TSP implementation project. Emma Newman was the lead planner. Christina was on that project team. Michael Liebler, our transportation engineer, myself included. We worked on that project for years as well. But I will just say there was a robust public hearing process at the city council after the planning commission, as you know, a robust planning commission public hearing process as well. So I think, you know, one of the things I've said at the beginning of these work sessions in the past, I didn't necessarily say it tonight, but that is these work sessions aren't intended to be deliberations for sure.
mhm,
The intent is to familiarize the planning commission with the public review drafts of the code sections. As we move into the planning commission public hearing process this fall, these sections will be updated based on the public feedback we get. I see these planning commission's work sessions as part of or an extension of the public comment period. You are all members of the public and have the same right to provide public comment on these sections as the rest of the public. The other thing I'll mention is that the council was very clear that they intended this code update project to be policy neutral. And when I say policy neutral, I'm referring to our comprehensive plan policies for the most part. The TSP is part of our comprehensive plan. So in that, we're not proposing to drastically change the language of these sections because, again, just within the last, I think, 2 years, the city council found and through the adoption of these sections that this new code language was in compliance with the TSP policies that we were implementing at the time. But again, and I'll just say that as we move into the public hearing process, I think all of the code language is open for discussion. And so I don't want to cut off the discussion tonight. I just want to lay out that if the planning commission's recommendation includes changes to these sections after or through the public hearings process, recommending to city council to consider changes beyond anything I've proposed to change, then that would be at the planning commission's discretion.
thank you. Appreciate that. I do believe, though, that this is clearly an instance where our must language is, I believe it's still in conflict, but I'll research the TSP again. Thank you.
And I'm making a quick note here. I appreciate the input and comments. I think it's all valuable to think about. Excuse me. And so I don't see any other hands at the moment. I'm going to try and scroll back down here to the place we were talking about the table. I think Commissioner McKinley, thank you for the input on the table. And you know, again, I appreciate different sets of eyes on this stuff and different perspectives because it gets to be a lot for one person. And I tend to start to, not that I'm the only one that has looked at this for sure. There's plenty of other people that have, but so I think I made a note here too quick that breaking out the middle housing types, I think that makes sense. I think there might be an opportunity to split this cell and, like you say, list out the different middle housing types and note that those are middle housing, and also note that multi-unit housing is everything beyond middle housing or not inclusive of middle housing. So thanks for that comment. It does get, like you said, without having the definition section of the code, not everybody's going to know what we're talking about. So making it more clear is helpful for sure. So similarly, these other tables, it looks like we need to fill in some numbers here. I was working with Michael Liebler on these, city's transportation engineer. And I don't think we definitively landed on a spot of what these driveway separations would be. Oh, I know, in looking at this. So again, the administrative rules implementing House Bill 2001 from the state for middle housing, I don't think allows us to specify maybe a driveway separation, although it may be more of an engineering standard. So I think that was why this is kind of undecided. I'm going to just make a note here. The other thing I'll say is that with the specific to these development standard sections that we're starting to go through now tonight, this one being the first on transportation, but a lot of the other ones we'll see for utilities and other things. We're trying to incorporate what we call the EDSPM, and actually here's a reference to it right here. The EDSPM is the Engineering Design Standards and Procedures Manual. So that is a manual of specifications is how I would refer to it. It's the design standards for kind of like the thickness of asphalt or the thickness of concrete or how much rebar has to be in a driveway approach for a commercial driveway, or anyway, more of the technical specifications of how different improvements are built. At some point in the past, many years ago or a number of years ago, or slowly over time before my time at the city, some standards had been taken out of the development code and put into the EDSPM. And, but to the extent that any of those standards are more than just design specifications that are actually approval standards, anything that is considered an approval standard needs to be in the code and cannot be located in the EDSPM. So with this code update project, as well as with the previous TSP implementation code update project, there is an intentional move to parse out from the EDSPM what is truly like an engineering specification or design standard versus an approval criteria, and bring back into the code, or just bring into the code anything that is or could be considered an approval standard. So that's some of the process or clarification attempt with some of these standards. I think we'll see more when we look at some of the other development standards sections like stormwater and other utilities, because a lot of that was already done with this section when we did the TSP implementation. Here's one of those examples where we provide this alternative language. So we say first, sidewalks must be located like in a certain way, wholly within the public street right of way, but there are instances where that may not be possible. So we provide an alternative. That would kick it from a type 1 kind of clear and objective review process. If they meet this, it's clear and objective, the sidewalks in this public street right of way. If it's something different than that, they could choose this alternative path, or it's from state law, it's clear that we can have a clear and objective standard that not everybody can meet. I mean, it doesn't mean our clear and objective approval standards have to be able to be met by everybody in all situations, or that all development could be built under clear and objective standards. We just have to have a clear and objective path. It's kind of about how high, I talk about how high the bar is set for what the clear and objective standard is. The other part of that state law requirement for having clear and objective standards is that it also cannot cause unreasonable cost and delay. And so it could be that we have a clear and objective standard that the bar is set so high, or standard is so onerous that it causes unreasonable cost and delay. and therefore it would also not meet the state law requirement. So we have to be careful where we set those clear and objective standards in terms of what they require, so that they're also not found to cause unreasonable cost and delay. So, but providing this alternative standard is an alternative to the clear and objective. And here, again, I'm pointing out in some of the notes that I think this needs more work, because we can have this alternative standard. It would then be a land use decision process where discretion is used. But then I'm asking, what standards would we evaluate it based on when we're analyzing that alternative? So that's fairly consistent throughout here, providing this alternative, different alternatives. Again, just clarifying language. Again, I'm happy to dig into any of this. I'm just scrolling over, kind of looking for significant things to point out, but otherwise a lot of it, like I said, is pretty fairly minor for the most part. And I think we're to the end of this section. So that is the infrastructure standards for transportation section. That's all I was going to go over with this, unless there's more questions or any comments. I'm happy to entertain. Otherwise, I'll jump to the next section. So the next section, not seeing any questions, I'm going to go to is in your packet tonight. Is for section 4.3.100. This section is another development standard section. It's infrastructure standards for utilities in general. So as you'll see, utilities listed here includes sanitary, sewer, stormwater management, water quality, on and on, power, water, public easements, that kind of stuff. Wireless telecommunications is in here. So again, this is an area where there's some EDSPM language, the engineering design standards, where we're pulling out back into the code, trying to figure out what belongs in the EDSPM, what doesn't. And so there is also implications on these utilities, again, from the middle housing rules. So again, and also the clear and objective path. So for the most part, all these, this is another section also that is primarily existing language. So the language in black text is existing language. The language in red text is new. And some of this is shown as track changes. I think here, so stormwater management is a big topic lately. I think I know I've mentioned this to you a number of times at least about our new stormwater permit from the state based on the Federal Clean Water Act. Through state DEQ, we have a new MS4 permit, which is our stormwater permit. This section will likely need more work in the future. We've worked on this language to try and create what I'll refer to as kind of I think an interim set of standards to address the requirements we have now for stormwater, but anticipating more stringent stormwater standards that will be under in the future. I think the time frame is a couple of years that we'll have to fully implement the new stormwater permit standards. And there's a whole separate project being initiated now that is working on that. And so at some point, it'll have to probably come back through Planning Commission and then to City Council again for additional code changes to implement all those new stormwater rules. So again, this section for stormwater management improvement is seen as kind of a interim set of standards to get us in compliance with our current permit or consistent with our current standards, but also moving forward closer towards where we're going to need to be. So anyway, there's kind of a moving target going on with stormwater right now, I would say. I'm not going to get into much details on all of that stuff. There's also two different things related to stormwater management. There's the quantity, the amount of stormwater, and then there's the quality of it, how clean stormwater is. So this section is general standards. Then when you scroll down lower, it gets into this next section is the capacity or quantity of stormwater and how the amount of stormwater is regulated. And then if I keep scrolling, hopefully it talks about the quality. This gets into pretty detailed. Again, a lot of this stuff I think came right out of the EDSPM. So a lot of this red language that's new language is stuff that's been cut and paste out of the EDSPM and brought back into the code that I was referring to before about how we're figuring out what are approval standards versus design standards. A lot of this talks about the different stormwater studies that have to be done. There, depending on the type of development or size of development, there's multiple different types of studies. There's a small site stormwater study, mid-level, a full site stormwater study. So again, there's triggers for those different types of studies. Then down here is where it gets into the quality. So there was general standards, then amount of stormwater, capacity or quantity. And now here's the quality protection. So we also have to make sure stormwater runoff is clean water. So anytime stormwater runs off into a designated wetland or a state regulated waterway, the water can't be dirty water, and there's standards for all of that. Today or historically under the previous or existing permit, as an example, roof runoff, so roof or water like rainwater that would run off a roof into a gutter into the street was seen as clean water, meaning it didn't need treatment for cleaning and could run directly off into, say, a waterway, where like runoff from a driveway or a street is seen as dirty because there's maybe oil drippings on the pavement that then get combined with the water, and so the water from that would have to be treated. So again, it gets pretty complex, and I'm just skimming over it, but a lot of that is dealt with in this quality section as well. The typical treatment type that's being implemented is vegetative treatment. So that's why we're seeing more and more of these types of stormwater treatment facilities like swales and rain gardens and things like that. Anyway, I see Commissioner Quavula. Yeah.
Commissioner Quavela, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things in the water quality. Under item number 3, which is under 4.3115 water quality protection, it says something about if a water course is degraded in riparian function, the applicant may relocate the water course. And then when we go further down under item 7, I believe it's under the same section.
Like it would be a different section.
It'd be C7, A. It says for new development and redevelopment, existing riparian area functions must be protected and preserved. Degraded functions must be restored or enhanced. And I'm wondering if those two items might be a little bit in conflict, that the one says if it's degraded, you can relocate it. And the other one says that degraded function needs to be restored or enhanced. That's a question.
Yeah, and I'll make note of that question. I'm not going to be able to answer it tonight. This is definitely not my area of expertise.
Okay, thanks.
I'll make note of it. Again, all this black text is existing language. So, and we recognize that there's definitely opportunity to fix and clean up this language. Again, this whole section dealing with stormwater is being comprehensively reevaluated and going to be updated under our new stormwater permit. I think the section you referenced above was sorry, if you can give me just a second here to make sure I capture your comment. You said A3.
A3, yes.
Yeah,
The
thank you.
degraded riparian function.
A3. Let me go back to the other one. Get both these cross references. And I'll look into that for you. And then maybe that we don't, again, I'll ask the question of our stormwater folks and find out what these two sections, how the interplay between them is supposed to work. And if there's truly a conflict that we can easily clean up now, can be fixed, or if they think it is, says what it's supposed to say and works okay, recognizing that it will probably all be rewritten within the next year or so. Good catch. So again, a lot of this is existing language, some cleanup. We've talked about
Mark,
the different, yep. Mhm.
Sorry to interrupt you. I have another
Sure.
question from Commissioner Gill.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark,
Hi.
sorry to interrupt.
No, that's
Well, you're
fine.
scrolling, but you scrolled past the, no, my thing just closed. Sorry. So on page 11, 4.3.117, which is the natural resource protection areas. So I'm curious, because I'm not looking at this comprehensively. I'm looking at this as you give us these sections. I am curious as to that. Yeah, that's exactly the spot. So not specific language here, but just the fact that this is in the infrastructure section. And I get why water runoff impacts this specifically, but I feel like all development of any kind needs to be aware of protection areas and including potential archaeology or historic things, all the Goal 5 stuff. So I was just wondering, is there a section that sort of does that comprehensively? And this is the highlight of it for infrastructure, especially the water issues? Or because if I was building something and I was gonna say, I look at a map and I see that I'm next to a wetland, it might not just be the infrastructure pieces that I need to know, I have to look at. And I wouldn't go looking in infrastructure to find out those protection areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. And so, and again, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it off the top of my head. And if Christina's tracking, she may be able to chime in.
So there is no other section for natural resource protection area. This is our standard. These are all our standards for implementing Goal 5, which I know you're familiar with. I will say that the header for that section may just have existed previously to this being adopted. And we can certainly change the titles of sections. So it doesn't have to be called infrastructure standards utilities. It could be, headers can be broken out separately. The city attorney's office in the municipal code actually has the authority to change headers because they're not substantive language. Like we could, in theory, without even an ordinance, change the way those headers work. So it shouldn't be a problem at all to structure it or label it in a way that makes more sense to people. But I can relate to your comment because I have struggled to find the right regulations just by the the headers that are assigned to them in other places. So there isn't another place that this really belongs. It is grouped with like other regulations, but I agree that the calling it an infrastructure standard is a little confusing.
Okay, thanks.
And so does that help? I think functionally how this section works is a lot of other code sections refer to this section, or is this section is triggered by a lot of other types of development. So it's not just, this section doesn't just come into play when there's some infrastructure development, if that helps address kind of some of your concern.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe the labeling like Christina mentioned or something so that when people are looking for that, it's easier to find. So, but thank you. That all answered it.
And then I have Commissioner Cuevila in the queue.
Yeah, keeping in the same section there under E, permitted uses within locally significant wetlands. Looking at item B under 1, and then also item F2 under 2 about farm practices. Wondering about herbicide and pesticide use within locally significant wetland and riparian natural resources, because maintenance and alteration of pre-existing ornamental landscaping and farm use both can have significant uses of herbicide and pesticide. So I'm wondering if that's acceptable practice within locally significant wetlands, and if so, or if not, maybe we should have something that says it isn't.
And this is the other one, farm practices of no greater scope.
Yeah, exactly. Because it does say below that normal farm practices do not include newer expanded structures. So it does have some prohibitions within that, but it doesn't particularly mention herbicide or pesticide use. And pesticides, not just herbicides, because both.
And yeah.
Okay.
I know from having worked in Lane County for years, farm practices as a term is defined in state law, and there's a lot of protections for farm practices. And so, you know, there might be an opportunity specifically on this one to reference maybe a statute or how it's defined in state law. But I think we can look into that.
Or as I said, if we're listing under item 3 below that, below the farm practices of the greater scope, if we're listing things that should not be done, which includes newer expanded structures, if we're also excluding, and please expand that from just herbicide to just say pesticides, because a herbicide is a pesticide.
Okay. Yeah,
they consider the herb noxious
plants.
weed a pest as well. So that would be.
And Christina, do you have any thoughts on that?
I just want to flag, first of all, that would be a policy change to the regulations and would probably require undertaking a larger goal 5 analysis that may not be within the council's intended scope of this project. I will note that I think this, in general, under goal 5, the wetland regulations are intended to place restrictions on grading, excavation, placement of fill, and vegetation removal, other than perimeter mowing and other cutting necessary. And I don't know that pesticides and herbicides count as vegetation removal under that rule or not. But I think, you know, changing the substance of what these rules cover would have policy implications that are broader than just than the council's direction on the scope of the project.
Well, we are actually changing code and writing new code. So it's just a suggestion,
Yeah.
But I think it should be clarified.
It just has it. That's a particular policy that probably has goal 5 implications is my input.
Thank you. And I'll look at those. And it is true that, you know, when you start messing with goal 5 specifically is a tricky one, and there's a lot of probably case law and administrative law on Goal 5. But I think it's worth looking into the question of figuring out what some of that means. My hunch is, you know, a lot of this language is probably almost verbatim out of some of the Goal 5 rules and things like that. And so we're probably just trying to be consistent with Goal 5. But because I didn't rework any of this sections, you know, in terms of content for the most part, I'm happy to look into it and just verify and check and see what's involved. We're getting close on time. Just I see we're about 5 minutes to 7. I'm going to try and scroll through the rest of this section here pretty quick. Again, I say this pretty much every time. I'm happy to receive comments, you know, via email or whatever. Again, this isn't a deliberation, so I appreciate the other sets of eyes on this. So that is the end of this section. So we made it through 2 of the sections tonight. I think that's great. We'll continue to work through additional infrastructure sections or the development standards sections next time. I think I don't know if it was a big deal for commissioners to not have a new packet or just have the packet rolled over like we did from last meeting. We could potentially do that again. It makes my life a little bit easier, not having to recreate a whole brand new packet, but I'm happy to do so if commissioners felt like it's useful or better to have a new packet. Otherwise, we are scheduled to continue these work sessions to try and get through the rest of these draft code sections as we move into the fall, which seems like it's slowly creeping our way. So I appreciate all your time and help with looking at this stuff with me. I'm happy to, did Commissioner Quavio have another question?
Yeah, I'm just fine with the way you've been presenting stuff. So just carry on as you're doing. It's going well. Thank you.
Mark, I see Commissioner Salazar has his hand up.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to concur with Commissioner Quavila that, yeah, it's been great the way you've been presenting the information so far, and I don't see any need to create additional work for you for posting those new packets.
Great, and there will be a new packet eventually once we get through these additional development standard sections. Hopefully some of our last work sessions will be on the housing code sections that you've heard quite a bit about in the past, but that's kind of where we'll end, is where I feel like we've kind of started way back when, but is on housing discussions. The other thing I'll just mention quickly is it was a great question I thought Chair McGinley asked me in the pre-meeting to this in preparation for tonight's work session yesterday, just about if this process is working for me. I feel like I'm getting the input I am hoping to get, and I do. I think this is working great for me. I am getting good feedback and input and comments and questions from the commission, so thank you for that. And it sounds like, and I hope it is, working well for all of you. So again, as we all move into the more formal public hearing process, we'll all have won't be starting from scratch, and we'll have seen a lot of it before. So thank you.
Mark, I have one question for you as an opportunity for some promotion. Can you remind us all when the Development Code Update Project survey closes?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner McGinley. So as I've mentioned before, we're in our kind of broad public outreach phase, and we did launch a virtual open house together with a community survey at the beginning of July. We anticipate that running through the end of this month. So in just another couple of weeks, August 31st is anticipated to be the last formal day for that. I was just saying earlier today in a different meeting that I don't necessarily see that having to be a hard deadline. I'll work with our public relations staff on that, but you know, the record for the public hearing, once we send DLCD notice here at the end of the month, will be open up to and through the actual public hearing in front of this body. And so but we do need to have a cutoff in terms of incorporating the public comments we do receive into a public hearing draft recommendation of the code, as well as findings and other things. So it won't be that the public involvement will stop completely. It's just that we'll start building in all the public comments we've received into refining these drafts into public hearings drafts. So thanks for the reminder. And the more we can spread the word about the virtual open house and the community survey, the better. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Do I have any other questions or comments from the rest of the commission? Okay. Seeing none, I adjourn the work session. Thank you, Mark. Okay, and a quick turnaround. It's also 7 o'clock. And so I hereby open the regular session of the Planning Commission. I see that the attendance has not changed. We're all still present, but I do want to do some introductions. So first, I wanted to note that Tom Boyott is here, and some commissioners may not have met Tom yet. So Tom, can you just introduce yourself and say what your role is, please?
Sure. Thank you, Chair McGinley. Tom Boyott. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Springfield. So practically everything the commission does interacts with our division in Development and Public Works. It's really great to see this commission as active as you are and really, you know, dissecting and getting into the issues and thinking about them. I really appreciate that. The code project is a huge project and it's, you know, very important to the future of Springfield. I joined last meeting because Christina Kraz's presentations are so good on the legal requirements that filter through planning. And also, you know, your work on just at least understanding what's in the proposed development code before it goes to public hearing. And then Mr. Darnielle, it's good to see you again. And I'm always very interested in our appeals and how we satisfy those and keep moving forward. But just again, really impressed with the commission and the work you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And then I'll have Gary introduce himself. Tonight's a little different because we're joined by a hearings official. So I'll hand it over to you, Gary.
Good evening. My name is Gary Darnielle. I'm a Springfield hearings official. My jurisdiction is the part of the urban growth boundary outside the city limits. I'm here tonight to open the meeting before the Springfield City hearings official regarding Luba remand.
Hold on, we're not there in the agenda yet. I think she was just asking. Yeah, sorry. I think she was just asking for you to introduce why you're here, but that we'll get to that part of the agenda really quickly.
Oh, shoot.
They've got to, they have to have business from the audience on unrelated matters and consider some meeting minutes from past meetings first. So real quick items.
Thank you, Christina. And thank you, Gary, for introducing yourself. So I'll just note, as Christina said, tonight's agenda is a little different than usual. And we don't usually have to work through appeals. So I'll just say that I have the agenda open and we'll work through all of this together and make sure that we get it as close to right as we can. So with that, we'll move on to our next item, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. So I will ask that everyone else remain muted while I recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us by phone or online to please keep yourselves on mute until you are called to provide public testimony. There is one time to present public testimony tonight under business from the audience, which is a time for anyone to speak to the Planning Commission on any subject that is not the Springfield Utility Board substation remand item. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? And Sandy sharing that now. Okay, I don't see any hands. So we will now move on to business from the audience. We will now take business from the audience. As a reminder, this is a time to speak on any topic that is not the remand of the Springfield Utility Board application that is on our agenda this evening. If you are joining us online and wish to speak, please use the chat window. Please send a comment to the host with your name, mailing address, and the subject you would like to speak about. You can select the host only at the bottom of the chat window. Please do not use the chat feature for any other purpose during the meeting. I will call on you when it is your turn to speak. For people calling in by phone, we will announce a time for those on the phone to speak. If you do not wish to speak, just state that you do not want to speak. Brenda, do we have anybody who has indicated they would like to provide public comment? It looks like you're muted.
I have received none
Okay,
tonight.
thank you. And do we have anybody on the phone?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So we will now move on to approval of minutes from our August 3rd, 2021 meeting. And I will ask if there are any corrections to the minutes or if we have a motion. Commissioner Quavela.
Yes, regarding the CCI minutes for the floodplain overlay district update. Those are the minutes we're talking about. As I recall, Commissioner Buck recommended that we have some PSAs added to that CCI or to that engagement plan. And Commissioner Gill suggested that we have disaster information. And I suggested fairly significant outreach to NGOs and Home Builders Association, et cetera. And then I think we also recommended some additional media be contacted than what was in the original plan. So I'd like to change, either say that there was a discussion that included some additions and that we voted on the plan as amended.
Thank you, Commissioner Quavela. I did receive a message about that, so I have the list if that's a little bit easier for staff. So I concur on amending the minutes for the CCI meeting to include the commissioner's suggestions on the citizen involvement strategy, which were to reach out to the Springfield Board of Realtors, Lane County Home Builders, environmental groups, and to provide media notice to local news organizations such as the Eugene Weekly and the Chronicle. Commissioner Quavela, does that reflect your comment?
Mostly, but we also did discuss PSAs, and then Commissioner Gill, I believe you asked for there to be some sort of disaster awareness inclusion in our PSAs, as I recall.
I see a head nod from Commissioner Gill. So with those discussed amendments, does anybody have a motion? Commissioner Salazar.
I move to approve the minutes as amended by Commissioner Quavela.
I'll second. Commissioner Gill.
Okay. Motion to approve the minutes with the amendments proposed by Commissioner Quavela, made by Commissioner Salazar, seconded by Commissioner Gill. Brenda, could you lead us in a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Commissioner McGinley,
Aye.
Commissioner Landon,
Aye.
Commissioner Gill,
Aye.
Commissioner Bergen.
Staying as I was absent.
Oh, yes, you were. Commissioner Buck,
Aye.
Commissioner Salazar,
Aye.
Commissioner Quavela,
Yes.
6-0, 1 absent.
Thank you, Brenda. Motion carries. Okay, the next item on our agenda is for the Planning Commission and the hearing official to jointly consider adoption of remand findings for Springfield Utility Board's application for an electric substation and transmission line in Glenwood, cases 811-19-000016-TYP2, 811-19-00084-TYP2, and 811-19-00085-TYP2. So I hereby open the session of the hearings official, and I will hand it over to the hearing official to, oh, I'm sorry, I hereby open the session for the Planning Commission. I'll hand it over to the hearings official to open it for the hearing official.
Okay, the Springfield hearings official opens up the meeting as provided by the chair of the Springfield Planning Commission.
Thank you, Gary. And I'll now hand it over to Christina for the explanation of the quasi-judicial process on remand.
Okay, and I am providing the process notes and disclaimers for the Planning Commission. So if the hearings official wants to add anything, then you can do that after the Planning Commission does their declarations of ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest when I'm done reading the process description. So the item tonight consists of 3 applications that have been remanded to the Planning Commission and hearings official jointly by the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. At this time, only the record has been reopened to allow new evidence. There is no public hearing being held tonight. A public hearing was provided in the original decision-making process in 2019 that complied with state law around quasi-judicial public hearings. Because none of the remand issues require oral testimony, it is sufficient to open the written record only. The criteria of approval for these applications as they relate to the remand issues are identified in the staff reports in tonight's packet. The record was reopened to allow Springfield Utility Board as the applicant to submit new evidence regarding the issues identified in LUBA's remand order. LUBA stands for the Land Use Board of Appeals. When a local governing body, Planning Commission, hearings official, or hearings officer reopens a record to admit new evidence, arguments, or testimony, then any person may raise new issues which relate to the new evidence, arguments, testimony, or criteria for decision-making, which apply to the matter at issue. At this time, no new issues have been raised regarding evidence in the record. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to LUBA must be raised no later than the close of the record. Issues must be raised clearly enough so that people can understand what it is and offer evidence in support of it, or else the issue cannot be raised on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. In all quasi-judicial decisions, including decisions on remand, members of the Planning Commission are to be unbiased. Before the start of your discussion, members of the Planning Commission must state whether they have any conflicts of interest, such as family, financial, or business relationship with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. If such potential or actual conflict exists, the commissioner will state whether it is potential or actual and whether he or she would like to step down from the Planning Commission during the case. Planning commissioners will also state whether they have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have any independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. And that would be any ex parte contacts or independent knowledge that has not been disclosed at a prior meeting of the Planning Commission. If any of the planning commissioners have had such contacts, they will disclose the substance of that contact. If a planning commissioner has independent knowledge of relevant facts, the planning commissioner will summarize those facts. During the time for public testimony, a witness may challenge the impartiality of a planning commissioner. Sorry, there is no time for public testimony tonight. And so I will skip to the next part. So Chair, it is now appropriate to ask if any planning commissioner wishes to declare any potential conflict of interest or actual conflict of interest, any ex parte contact, or any independent knowledge of relevant facts. And if there have been ex parte contacts or independent knowledge of relevant facts, we may need to pause to address those procedurally.
Thank you, Christina. I will go through the commission one by one. I'll start with myself. I have no potential conflicts of interest and no ex parte contacts. Commissioner Landon.
Also, no ex parte contacts nor conflicts of interest.
Commissioner Koivula.
No ex parte contacts, no conflicts of interest. I have additional knowledge based on driving by the site below, both on Franklin Boulevard and on I-5. And I also visited the site on Street View in Google Maps.
Thank you. Commissioner Gill.
I have no conflicts of interest and no ex parte contact.
Commissioner Bergen,
No conflict of interest and no ex parte contact.
Commissioner Salazar,
I have no conflicts of interest and no ex parte contacts.
and Commissioner Buck.
No conflicts of interest and no ex parte contact.
Thank you, everyone. And I will hand it over to the hearings official to.
1 second, sorry.
sorry.
Commissioner Cuevila disclosed independent knowledge of the facts. And so we need to disclose what that independent knowledge is to determine if it's information that is not already in the record. Because we may need to provide the applicant with an opportunity to respond to that information if it is not already in the record. So a disclosure of what the substance of that and how it is different than the information in the record would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Commissioner Cuevila.
Yes, I drove both on Franklin Boulevard and I-5 and viewed the site. I think that those views of that site are also provided in the record.
Okay.
Those particular views are provided by photographs in the record already. I did visit the 22nd Avenue from Henderson Street on Street View in Google. And I don't believe that that is in the record currently. So that would be independent knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Christina, was there anything further on that item before we hand it over to Gary?
I think we can discuss after the staff, after there are other questions and depending on the direction that the Planning Commission wants to take at that time, whether that piece of information is significant to the Planning Commission's decision-making that some should have an opportunity to respond to that evidence, or whether it's sort of minor and not affecting the outcome of the decision.
Okay.
So I think you can turn it over.
Okay, I'll hand it over to the hearings official to disclose any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts.
As hearings official, I'd like to indicate that I've had no ex parte contacts, nor have I taken a site view of the property, and I have no actual or potential conflicts of interest of which I'm aware.
Thank you. So I will now hand it over to Senior Planner Andy Limbird for a staff report on the remand issues and subs materials.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Good evening. And Mr. Hearings Official, Gary, good to see you again. If I can share my screen here, bear with me. I'm going to bring up my staff presentation and I'm going to conduct a slideshow from the beginning, and hopefully that will be viewable. Do we have a PowerPoint visible on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is just a brief summary of the site, the configuration of properties, the orientation of the site relative to the city limits and the urban growth boundary. The site in question that Commissioner Cuevila mentioned is the Westerly property accessible off East 22nd Avenue. That is inside the city limits. The adjoining properties that run generally to the southeast, there are two properties owned by the Springfield Utility Board. They are outside the city limits. The third property, the most southeasterly property, is owned by Eugene Water and Electric Board, or EWEB, and that is the location of the tie-in point for the transmission line. I'll just provide kind of a simplified diagram of the anticipated substation is on the Westerly property. There is an existing gravel access road installed by a prior landowner that is going to be enhanced to provide access along the transmission line. And the red line is generally the orientation, simplified somewhat, but it's generally where the electrical transmission line will run to a tie-in point where there's an existing transmission tower on kind of a knoll along the I-5 corridor. And that's there are some existing towers there. So that's where the connection point will be made. This is from the applicant site plan set, and it shows the configuration of the compound for this substation. This substation is identified in the city's comprehensive plans, particularly the Public Facilities and Services Plan. Upgrades to the Glenwood electric system are needed for planned urban development and intensification of development in this portion of the city, and also for essentially security of service, electric service. It's a bit of a hodgepodge, anecdotally, a bit of a hodgepodge of electric infrastructure already existing there. So to facilitate the planned development of this area, a guaranteed and stable electric system is needed. These approvals for a tree felling permit, hillside development permit, which is the portion of the site that runs generally to the southeast along the hillside, as well as the site plan for the electric system compound. The substation compound were approved in 2019. They were subsequently appealed. The staff reports that you have this evening are substantially what was provided to the Planning Commission and hearings official back in 2019 in response to the appellant's assignments of error. Staff has then taken these standing staff reports and added additional findings and references to the applicant's materials. You will find those highlighted within the staff reports that have been provided to you. Staff wanted to identify the specific findings pertaining to the remand while also retaining the content that had been approved up to the point where it left Springfield's and the hearings officials' purview, so to speak, and went to LUBA. Now it's come full circle and come back for final adoption. Here is a substantial packet of information that has been appended to the packet for you. There are a series of studies and analyses that the applicant has provided as part of the remand response. And I'm just going to identify the 4 key issues, the prime issues that are the subject of the remand. That is a grading plan and report for the placement of transmission line poles. There was an extensive geotechnical report and analysis for the substation itself. The applicant has supplemented this with the transmission line poles, which are going to be placed in the hillside, essentially augured into the hillside. But that was a necessary element to supplement the hillside development permit. The second is a tree canopy preservation and evaluation of alternative alignments for the transmission line. In the applicant's materials, you'll see a number of computer generated views and images showing potential alignments along the hillside and discussing the pros and cons of each one. As a result of the evaluation of these different alignments and the essentially the drawbacks associated with alternative alignments, the selected transmission line alignment that is before you this evening was the preferred option to minimize the impact of the hillside and also the tree cover, and not interfere with either I-5 as a major transportation corridor or the existing railroad line at the bottom of the hill. That has been supplemented in the tree felling permit staff report. Relatedly, the treatment of trees within the project area also has been incorporated within the tree felling staff report. And finally, issues pertaining to the Glenwood refinement plan, specifically the electrical facility siting standards. It is mentioned briefly in the tree felling permit, but also addressed in the site plan review. These are all interrelated issues. There is some cross-referencing in the staff reports, and staff has tried to essentially close the loop on all of the various issues because of the 3 different staff reports containing findings that are largely interrelated based on the criteria of approval that were before the Planning Commission and the hearings official at the time. So this essentially summarizes staff's summary of this remand. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know Christina would be happy to answer any questions too. There has not been any comment received in response to public notification of this meeting. There was a mailed out notification as well as standard notification of the Planning Commission meeting. So there has been no feedback from the appellant or any other adjacent residents or neighbors or prior commenters regarding the remand.
Real quick, I want to jump in to follow up on Commissioner Cuevila's disclosure earlier. Attachment 5, page 47, does have the view from East 22nd. So I think that information is in the record and we should be all good from that perspective.
Thank you, Christina.
Okay, commissioners, if anybody has questions for staff on the issue subject of remand, please raise your hand or turn on your camera to indicate that you'd like to speak.
And I just have to report, I cannot see everyone at the same time with a screen share. So please let me know if there's anyone that raised their hand. It's Mr. Darnielle.
One question. Can you verify that the grading plan uses 5-foot contours?
I cannot verify that. I believe that the information that was in the applicant's material, well, I'd have to ask the applicant that actually. I believe it was 2-foot contour intervals that the city's able to provide through their LiDAR. But is that what Christina would be appropriate to ask the applicant? Because I don't have that in front of me right now.
No, we can't ask the applicant, but I'm looking at the amended grading plan. We have to go by the information on the record, so we can't ask the applicant to introduce something into the record that isn't there.
I was just looking for confirmation.
Yeah, but I'm just going to do a quick word search for contour in the application materials. They are 5-foot contours are illustrated on the proposed drainage and terrain exhibit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And that is on page, that information is on page, attachment 5, page 12.
Great. Thank you, Christina.
Andy, I'm not seeing any questions from staff or from commission.
Okay, thank you.
So the next thing that we would consider, if there are no questions to staff, is whether we would like to close the written record or hold the record open to another date. Is there any discussion on that? See Commissioner Cuevila.
Is there an opportunity for the applicant to be questioned?
No, we have there's no opened public hearing. So the applicant submitted all information they wanted considered in the in their request for remand. But if the planning commission feels that they need more information, or the hearings official as well, but if you feel that you need more information or there are questions related to the remand issues that haven't been fully addressed, then you can talk about that, and you can certainly leave the record open with a request for the applicant to provide more information to you in writing. But it helps to streamline the remand process if we don't open a public hearing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Salazar.
Thank you. I just had a quick question for Christina. Do we still need to, it seems to me that the knowledge of the information of knowledge of the site that Commissioner Cuevila let us know about, it seems like that is in the record, but I just wanted to double check to make sure, do we need to take any action on determining the significance of that additional information?
Great. Thank you for checking. That's a great question. The information is in the record. So it is not, it sounds like it's not information that's not already been provided by the applicant. And so we don't need to provide the applicant opportunity to respond to information the applicant has already submitted to us. So good question. I think we've closed the loop on that one. And I appreciate the full disclosures of information that might be potentially outside the record, it's much better to disclose and then realize information is in the record than to not disclose and realize that later that it's not.
Thanks for that clarification.
Gary, you can go ahead.
I have another question for staff. In regards to the site plan review, conditions 1 and 2 regarding the maintenance agreement, do any of the concerns of the maintenance agreement, which include the rain garden, the swales, and the detention basin, occur outside of the city limits?
No, they do not.
Okay.
Those constructed facilities are entirely within the compound area, which is inside the city limits.
Good. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so hearing no additional questions from the commission, I move to close the written record.
Second.
Okay. Moved by myself, Commissioner McGinley, seconded by Commissioner Quivla. I do see discussion from Commissioner Salazar.
I did notice that Mr. Darnielle had his hand raised, so.
I'm just waiting for my turn.
For a point of clarification, I'll just say that the commission is acting separately from the hearings official, and so we have the ability to close the record for our part, and then Mr. Darnielle has the opportunity to close the record for his part. So they are separate actions. Is there any further discussion before we go to a vote? Okay, Brenda, could you lead us in a roll call vote, please?
Yep. Commissioner McGinley,
Aye.
Commissioner Landon,
Aye.
Commissioner Koivula,
Yes.
Commissioner Gill,
Aye.
Commissioner Bergen,
Aye.
Commissioner Salzar,
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
We have a 7-0 vote.
Thank you, Brenda. Motion made by myself, seconded by Commissioner Gill to close the public record, or to close the written record, carries. Okay, and I will hand it over to Gary.
The Springfield hearings official closes the written record.
Thank you, Gary. And so, Andy, would you mind stopping your share? I don't know what the proper verb is there for sharing your screen. Thank you. Okay, so we can now move into deliberations, but I will just clarify that we do not need to make a decision tonight. And so, that is, we do have more time to review the information if it's something that we'd like to do. And we can also coordinate that decision making with the Springfield hearing official. And I see Christina popped on in case she has anything else to say.
I was just staff would like the opportunity to present the final staff report and findings after the hearings official has made his decision. So, and that will, I'm assuming that will not be tonight in this meeting. And so assuming that we would like to bring it back, I think it's scheduled, Brenda can correct me. I think that there's a placeholder for the first September meeting.
And that will be September 8th. Just for everybody to know.
That's correct.
So that's my request to the commission, but of course you can make that ball is in your court.
Is there any discussion on that, Gary?
It's my intent to have written decisions out well before the September date, at least a week before.
Thank you, Gary. Any discussion from the commission? I'll say that I concur with staff's recommendation to hold off. Commissioner Gill?
I was just going to say I support the staff recommendation.
Great. Any other discussion from the commission? Okay, so with that, I could hand it over to Gary to end the session of the hearings official. Gary, did you want to have any action there?
The Springfield hearings official officially closes the record and the meeting before him.
Thank you. And with that, we can move on with our agenda tonight. Thank you for joining us tonight, Gary. So at the September 8th meeting, we will review staff's presentation of the Springfield hearings official's findings, and then we can make our decision then.
Would you like me present at that meeting?
I will defer to staff there, or I can also hear from commissioners on their preference.
I think if the hearings official's decision has been made, then unless the planning commission has a different direction from staff's perspective, I don't think it needs to be another joint meeting.
Okay, do you agree with that, Gary?
I do.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. It was nice to see you here, and we look forward to reviewing your findings next month.
Thank you and good evening.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. It's a bit odd to go through that process. The Planning Commission has not received another remand in 27 years. So it's a bit new to go through. So the next thing on our agenda is any business from members of the Planning Commission.
Well, I had a BPAC meeting that I can briefly review if you'd like. Commissioner Landon.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so there was a BPAC mission and they went over 5-year plan and planning and projects that are underway. Main Street pedestrian crossing 66th and 67th. A lot of you already know about that. South 28th Street paving, Mill Street reconstruction, ADA transition projects, downtown district lighting, and transit demand management preparation for the future. That's all the good news. The bad news is they don't have current funding for street ceiling and overlay, street lighting infill, bike wayfinding and safety, and City Hall public bike parking. There's a lot of things that they like to do that they just can't because we don't have money for it. But it was interesting, to hear about the things that they have been doing. So, end of my report.
Thank you, Commissioner Landon. And I have Commissioner Buck followed by Commissioner Cuevila.
Thank you, Chair. Can you define for me what BPAC is? I apologize. I'm not familiar with that term.
Bicycle
Pollinators.
Bicycle Pedestrian Activities Committee.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cuevila.
Report of council action in a way. I attended last night's meeting of the Springfield Economic Development Association or Agency, I'm sorry, which was a special meeting regarding the request for qualifications for Glenwood Riverfront development. Springfield Economic Development Association, for those who aren't aware, is the entire city council plus our county commissioner, Joe Burney. So the key dates for the request for qualifications are going to be, they're going to the end of this month, they're going to request for qualifications for developers on the waterfront and begin advertising for developers to come forward with ideas about what to do with the 9 acres that the city owns waterfront in Glenwood. approximately 10:15, so October 15th, the submissions will be due in. They'll begin the process of interviewing and analyzing the submittals from folks, including they have some hired folks looking at the legality and some other things to assist staff to go forth on that. They're going to appoint a technical committee to look through this as well, which will include a planning commission member, a member of the Community Development Advisory Committee, staff members, Homes for Good members, economic development organizations, local and municipal peers, so probably folks from Eugene and surrounding areas. So a couple of things in regard to that. They will be looking for the Planning Commission to make an assignment to that technical review committee. And I had a question in regard to that. There may be in the future, there may be some land use decisions that have something to do with the Glenwood property, for instance, minor changes to the Glenwood refinement plan, et cetera. So if a person were to participate as a planning commissioner on that technical committee reviewing these sites, would that make them prejudicial or having additional knowledge that might make them recuse themselves from a planning commission decision later? So I'd appreciate legals.
I'm happy to weigh in on that. First, I want to note that any discussion of who to appoint to that committee needs to occur after the submissions are all in, after October 15th. So you won't need to appoint one of yourself, like determine who to appoint to that until after that competitive process is done. And the reason for that is to prevent whoever is nominated to that role from being lobbied by potential participants. Or for example, if one of you was affiliated with a group that proposed, then you would be disqualified from participating in the review, obviously, if you are employed by or participating in that from the proposal side. Then to answer your question, Commissioner Clavel, that's a really good question. And I think that as long as the planning commissioner, so the planning commissioner's role in the technical advisory committee will be around viewing the qualifications of a CETA development partner and who is the most qualified entity for CETA to work with, and then making a recommendation around that frame of reference. So there at this, a request for qualifications is very different from a request for proposals, in that there is no, and you know this from the meeting, but for commissioners who weren't there is no actual development concept that is set down as part of this RFQ process. They're not even submitting images or pictures, of what they would do or talking about that at all. It's really about the qualifications of the team. And so it's very different from, forming opinions about whether the development is good or not, or any criteria of approval that we would have under our code, because they're just such different, roles. But the Planning Commission's familiarity with what makes good development in Springfield is a valuable input into what makes a good development partner. So, so I don't think it'll be an issue from that perspective. And then in addition, as long as a planning commissioner doesn't, if or when land use decisions are made or recommendations are made by the planning commission, if that planning commissioner is unbiased and has no actual bias in a quasi judicial decision, then other input the planning commissioner may have given previously won't affect any bias issues, because it's the test is whether there's actual bias. And then in terms of conflicts of interest, those would again be related to your personal or family business or relationships. And so if you have a conflict of interest, it wouldn't arise from participation in helping to select a developer unless you already had that conflict, in which case you wouldn't participate on the committee to begin with. So it shouldn't pose an issue in participation down the road if or when any land use decisions come up to you. But that's a great thing to be thinking about and a good question.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to recommend to the commissioners, some of which I'm sure would be interested in serving on that RFQ review, that the documents for that are on the City Council webpage. And I'm sure that staff can send us an email that points exactly where those would be if folks want to serve on that and or review some of the Glenwood concepts. Thank you.
I can make a note to that what we can send out the final version. What was published is the 95% complete, but there'll be some minor tweaks before it's totally done and ready to go out on August 30th.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuevla. And I think that it's actually a good opportunity to talk about why Commissioner Landon was at the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee meeting and why Commissioner Cuevla was watching the CETA meeting to Commissioner Buck, who's probably confused. So we each have, or not each, but there's a set of Planning Commission liaison roles that we we're nominated for and voted upon internally on the Planning Commission. And so I think it's a good opportunity for us to go around and just say if we have one of those liaison roles and what that group is. And it's good, knowledge for anybody who's watching and a good reminder for us on commission. So I can go ahead. One of my positions is that I'm chair, so I preside over meetings. And then a liaison role that I have is to the Development Code Update Project Governance Committee. So that's with 2 city councilors, and I serve alongside Commissioner Bergen as the Planning Commission representatives. And we've been, we're intended to meet quarterly. We met a little bit more than that because of House Bill 2001. To discuss the Development Code Update Project a little further in depth with Mark. I'll hand it over to Commissioner Cuevla.
Thank you, Chair McGinley. I attend CETA meetings because I'm interested in what's going to happen on the Springfield or the Glenwood waterfront. There's not actually a commission planning commission liaison to that, but I am planning commission liaison to the CDAC, which is the Community Development Advisory Committee, which serves to distribute community block grants to deserving concepts like charities, emergency home repairs, etc. So that's my role besides Planning Commission. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuevla. And Commissioner Gill.
I am currently the Planning Commission liaison to our City Council liaison. So for example, since Councilor Pitts could not be here tonight, I will reach out to him and see if he wants to have an overview or ask any questions about what happened at the meetings. It's not a ton of communication, but there's a little bit there.
Thank you, Commissioner Gill. Commissioner Bergen.
Thank you. And my role is, as Chair McGinley had mentioned earlier, is sitting on that governance committee for the code development rewrite. And it's been great and super helpful. So a lot of times when we are hearing the code development update, Chair McGinley and I have heard it before. So it's good to hear it again because usually something else sets in of an idea of a way verbiage is setting. So it's been great and appreciate the opportunity.
And Commissioner Landon, I think you're our last liaison.
Yeah, kind of like you mentioned, Bicycle Pedestrian Activities Committee, and they do an awful lot with, frankly, road development, figuring out where to put some of these bike stations, where you can check out a bike for whatever, nature trails. So it's kind of fun because this is actually stuff that once they get it done, you'd actually like to go do it.
Great, thank you. And not to forget, you're also our vice chair. So that's kind of the makeup of the committee with all of our liaison roles. And we usually vote on those at the beginning of the year. So stick around the beginning of 2022, there will be an opportunity for both Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Salazar to sign up for those. We just love getting involved with more local government meetings. So any additional business from the Planning Commission? Commissioner Gill.
I just wanted to share for any folks who are interested in downtown development and vitality, the Oregon Main Street Conference will be virtual this year, and it will be October 6th through 8th, and registration opens this week. So it's not super high cost, and there's a lot of great programming around downtowns.
Thank you, Commissioner Gill. Okay, seeing no further hands, I'll pass it over to Sandy for any business from the Development and Public Works Department.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Sandy Belson. I'm the Interim Planning Manager. And to carry on what Commissioner Gill was saying, if you are interested in attending the Main Street Conference or other conferences, we do have a small budget to pay for commissioners training if it's appropriate to your volunteering on the commission. So if so, please let Brenda know and she will be able to help you with that cost. So I do have one quick update. It's been a long time coming, but it's staff's we've been so busy that we haven't been able to add this extra page to the Springfield Oregon Speaks that would have the council agendas with commissioner assignments, but that is functional. It's just a matter of us getting it current and accessible to you. So that will be there before the council meetings actually start in September. And if there is other information that we can put there, such as conferences or other training opportunities, we'll add that onto that calendar page as you had suggested. So thank you for the suggestion, Commissioner Bergen, and it's becoming a reality. It's just taking us a little bit longer since it's not the top priority. Then I wanted to talk to you about your next meeting on September 8th. So for most of the summer, your work sessions have been starting at 5:30 because there's been a lot of information to cover, and we wanted to be able to get you ready for the public hearing process on the code this fall. So scheduled for that meeting is obviously the deliberations on the remand findings for the sub-electric station. We also will be having a public hearing on the code changes for the floodplain overlay zone. So you are familiar that that's coming. I don't really know how long that item will take. It depends on how many people decide to come to the public hearing. We are sending out about 700 notices to property owners tomorrow. So my question to you, if you hadn't figured it out by now, is do you want to start your work session at 5:30 or 6? We gave you kind of a break today because you've been working so hard and started at 6, but what's your preference for your next meeting?
Commissioner Gill.
I'm okay with it going a little longer if that's helping Mark move that process forward and helping that time, the development code timeline happen. So if that gets us through a few more sections, I'm okay with that.
Commissioner Landon.
Same thing for the 5:30. I think it's not that much.
Commissioner Cuevila.
Concur.
I think last time I just asked if anybody who's a parent or caretaker or has a commute, there's just making sure that we're accommodating everyone if we start at 5:30. Okay, Commissioner Buck.
I could make the 5:30. I mean, it's a bit of a hustle for me, because I got to get off work, and in September I'm going to have some school schedules to deal with as well. I can certainly do it, but there may be future meetings where it gets a little harder. But on the 8th, I think I can make it happen still.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And it does sound like the 5:30 work sessions are a temporary thing before we begin that public hearings process in the fall, but we'll be sure to continue checking in to make sure that if we do change our schedule, it works for everyone. And just a reminder that part of our Planning Commission Zoom guidelines, since we know that we'll be operating virtually at least through September, are that you are able to turn off your camera if there's something that comes up, with your family, roommates, anybody who may be around. We're all human, so please, if you need to eat, turn off your camera. Please do that too. Take care of yourselves for these extra long meetings. So Sandy, sounds like 5:30 works for September 8th, but let's continue this process of checking in if we do have earlier meetings.
Thank you. And, it might help if we get a little bit of a break before 7 o'clock so people can go take care of something before the regular session starts. So I'll talk to Mark about that. We will start at 5:30, but to not go right up until 7 on that agenda item.
Thank you.
And that's all I had for this evening. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. And again, kudos to Commissioner Bergen for suggesting the Planning Commission resource page on Springfield Oregon Speaks. I appreciate staff following through with that and love the idea of conference opportunities being shared on there as well. Is there any other business tonight? Okay. Seeing none, I adjourn the regular meeting of the Planning Commission. See you all on September 8th at 5:30 p.m.
Sophie, I just have to say, now that we're off the record, I'm so glad you didn't need those gift cards. Gosh.
Yeah, that's